Hello chess friends and welcome to Jozarov Chess Channel and welcome to the most important game of the Norway Chess Tournament in 2022. Welcome to the epic battle between Vishy Anand and Magnus Carlsen from the round 5 of this super event. So what to say about the tournament so far? It's really incredible tournament where Vishy started really in a beautiful way. Vishy won many games, but eventually in the last round he lost his game against Vesely so in the Armageddon game, and Magnus Carlsen started really in a difficult way, but then afterwards Magnus also won many games, so both of them are now in the lead after 4 rounds. So it was now really critical and important moment of this super event, because who wins now this game I think has really great chances to win the whole thing. So let's see now what happened. We're starting now with the Armageddon game, because the first classical time format game ended in a draw. It was, I think, an up and down game, but Vishy had, I think, a much better position through the whole game. In the classical time format game he should have converted the game into a win. I think he had really great chances, but eventually made a couple of inaccuracies and allowed Magnus Carlsen to get back into the game, and Magnus of course found then some drawish ideas. So as I said, the game ended in a draw. Now we're in the Armageddon game, which means now that Vishy has to win the game with the white pieces. He has 10 minutes on the clock, Magnus has only 7 minutes on the clock. If the game ends in a draw, of course, then Magnus will get 2 points. So let's see now what happened. It was really beautiful and dynamic Armageddon game as usual, because the Armageddon is of course many times the most epic of all games. So let's see now what happened. E4 here played by Vishy. We have E5 by Magnus, knight to F3, knight to C6, bishop to C4. We have the Italian game. After move knight to F6, we have the so-called 2 knights defense, and Magnus played also this defense in the beginning, also in the classical time format game between the two of them. Now Vishy again plays this classical system with the move d3. You can of course also go immediately with this knight attack with the move knight to g5, but then the game is getting more tactical. It's, I think, then a wild battle between white and black. So that's why here in the continuation we have now the classical system d3. So here Vishy decides to play a calm positional game. So we have bishop to c5, we have bishop to g5 by Vishy Anand, and now an interesting idea here by Magnus Carlsen. He plays now immediately bishop to e7. It's really unnatural sometimes a little bit to play with the same piece twice in the opening stage, but it's playable. Nothing wrong with this idea. Still, the evaluation is about equal, so this position has been also reached many times in chess history. So we have here knight to c3, d6. We have a4 by Vishy. Now kingside castling by Magnus Carlsen, a5. So here Vishy expands on the queen side. Now he could also try some ideas like a6. So in the continuation, bishop to g4 here by Magnus Carlsen. He's saying, okay, you didn't play this prophylactic move, you didn't play this h3 idea. Now I'm going to pin you, and I hope maybe here to create some tactical damage here with some ideas of knight to d4, of course. So here in the continuation h3, we have bishop to f3 here by Magnus Carlsen. If you play bishop to h5, then bishop to f6, bishop to f6. I think here g4 g5 could be very interesting. So that's why maybe here in this particular scenario I think white can even open somehow the g file. Doesn't have to even necessarily to castle here kingside. Maybe we can try some ideas, I don't know, maybe queen to e2, queen to d2, then maybe even a6, queenside castling would be also an opportunity. But I think the bishops here, the Leipzig bishop, and then afterwards also the bishop, the Dartford bishop is becoming an object of white pawn attack here. So that's why it would be very risky. It's g4 then h4. So as I said, this should be then I think a pleasant game for white. So that's why here after move h3 we have bishop to f3. Magnus realized this threat by white, so that's why queen to f3, and now Magnus played knight to d4. You have to play queen to d1 in order to protect your c2 pawn. So we have here c6 by Magnus Carlsen. This is a very important move, I think, because you could have some problems around the square d5, especially if the knight would be taken, then bishop to f6, then knight to d5 could be also an opportunity. c3, kicking away the knight, the bishop is then bad here on f6. So c6 is a beautiful prophylactic move here by Magnus. So we have here kingside castling by Vishy, b5, attacking the bishop on c5. If you take en passant, then nothing dramatically actually changed here. Rook to a8, queen takes a8, and still b5 is, I think, working here for white. b5 for black, pardon me, b5, b4, even b3 in some occasions. Then afterwards maybe to create also some damage on the queen side would be possibilities for black. So that's why here after move b5 we have bishop to a2 by Vishy Anand. We have knight to e6, a beautiful move by Magnus, finally challenging challenging the bishop on g5. We have bishop to e3 and now a6. Magnus fixes now really in a beautiful way the pawn structure, has now really healthy pawn structure, and he has now also the opportunity to break through with the potential d5 move. Really good position here for black. I think Magnus got out of this opening really in a good way. So we have queen to f3. Vishy Anand finishes the development. What I mean about this is of course that finally white has a rook connection, which is a very important stage in the opening. So first you should of course develop your minor pieces, secure the king by castling, and then you should connect your rooks like Vishy Anand did here. So we have queen to d7 by Magnus. We have knight to e2, d5. Finally this breakthrough in the central move, because you cannot really wait here. You have to make something out of this, because we can also say that black has really beautiful position with both of these knights. The knights are controlling the center of the board, so that's why breakthroughs with pawns are here really possible. So in the continuation we have c3, we have bishop to c5, which is a beautiful positional idea here by Magnus Carlsen, because he's saying your main strength, the main strength of whites here is actually that you have the bishop pair on the board. So that's why Magnus is saying, I will take your only advantage that you have in the position. If you don't have the bishop pair anymore, then I think with these two knights, especially with this centralized pawn storm that black has created here, black could have really a solid position. So here we have e takes d5, c takes d5. Look at this. Magnus connects down really two important pawns, two important mobile pawns in the center of the board. We have bishop to c5 and now knight to c5. So even if after this trades of bishops, still Magnus Carlsen's position didn't change. Still he has a great position. And now the main goal I think here is e4, especially because of the fact that the queen is a little bit weird here on f3. So with the move e4 we could get also an extra tempo against the queen, and then we could include of course also some other pieces into the game. So here Vishy tried d4. That would be very cool, because if black takes now, e takes d4, then knight to d4, and this would be a perfect position for white now, because you would have a powerful centralized knight. You would have also blockade against an isolated pawn. So this should be much better here for white. But this is not working, because Magnus finds again this beautiful counterattack. As I said, he finds simply this +1 tempo sort of against the queen. This is now very important move. And after move e4 we have queen to e3, and after knight to d3 here Magnus is I think taking over in the position. Although instead of this move knight to d3, actually knight to b7 is slightly more correct. I think this would be a perfect, even much better position here for black, because in the near future we can expect I think the move f3 for white, because white should not tolerate the space advantage. What I mean about the space advantage is of course that black is here already a pawn on the 4th rank, so it's very unpleasant to face this kind of a pawn. So that's why I think in many occasions you want to break this pawn with the move f3. But now actually look at this, with this maneuver knight to b7 you can continue with the knight to d6. After f takes e4 you can cement simply your position around the square e4, although you're leaving a little bit again this isolated pawn on d5. But this is now a different story I think than this previous position where also black was left with an isolated pawn. Look at this, these two knights are controlling the center of the board. They're very powerful. In the continuation we could also maybe try to include the queen somehow into the game. So it's I think a beautiful position here for black. So but okay, as we said, after move queen to e3 we have knight to d3 by Magnus Carlsen. We have queen to d2 protecting the pawn on the b2, and now Magnus simply includes the rook into the game, and he has now the support of this very important pawn. The most important piece here, it's really the pawn on e4, because it creates of course the advantage of space for black. So after move rook to e8 we have now this idea f3. So as we said, black will be challenged with this particular move in one moment of the game, but now Magnus finds a beautiful move again. He finds the way here to jump with the knight on f2, because of course if you take rook to f2 then you get e3, the fork. So that's why here in the continuation after move knight to f2 we have f takes e4. But now after move knight to e4 Magnus actually found a different way to reach the position that I wanted to get. So Magnus found even a much better continuation. So here knight to e4, look at this again, these two powerful knights are dancing in the center of the board. The queen is endangered. We have again a +1 tempo. Again the queen has to move, and look at this rook is supporting. This bishop is a little bit out of game because of the pawn. So much better position here for black. So in the continuation we have queen to d3, queen to d6, rook to f3, we have g6 creating some breathing spaces for the king. And now rook to f1 here by Vishy Anand. He's trying, of course, to cause some tactical damage, especially because of this knight on f6 that is a little bit loose on the board, because Magnus played now maybe even a not unnecessary move g6, but here still black should be much better. So in the continuation, knight to h5, and this move I really liked by Magnus because it was a provocative move. Magnus really wanted Vishy to play the move g4 that Vishy also played in the game, because now after move g4, okay, Magnus has to step back on f6, but now look at this, we have here an advanced pawn. There's simply too much space in front of the king, so the king is a little bit endangered, I think, here. Even in the near future, I think we can expect even some sacrifices with knight takes g4 and similar stuff. So something went wrong, I think, here in Vishy's position. So here in the continuation, we have knight to f4 by Vishy Anand. He's trying, of course, to include more pieces into the game. We have knight to g5, and this was now a really unnecessary move by Magnus Carlsen, because he actually helped out here white, because now white can Vishy can improve, of course, the position of the rook. He can play rook to f2 and then follow with rook to g2. Instead of this move knight to g5, actually what you should do is just improve your position on the e file. You can double up the rooks and maybe include other pieces into the game. So still you can leave this pawns this knights in the center of the board like this. You don't have to touch them because they're really your best pieces on the board. Now with rook to e7, maybe rook to e8 in the near future, you can improve, as I said, your position on the e file, and then in one particular moment maybe you can open the e file, jumping with the knight somewhere, and maybe somehow cause again new opportunities in the position. But okay, as I said, knight to g5 is not losing here for Magnus, but it was maybe a slightly inaccurate move. So we have rook to f2, we have knight to e4. So you see Magnus played couple of times with the same piece and actually allowed here Vishy Anand to include the rook into the game. Now the rook on the g file is much better than it was here on f3. So we have here h6, again a slightly inaccurate move, because here Magnus had to play, I think, the move g5. This was really important to play now in this particular moment, this move, because now white needs to step back on e2. And now again, look at this, this position is really weird. The knight is a little bit loose here on the board. Now in the continuation we can try again from black's perspective, rook to e6, maybe knight to g3, knight takes g3, maybe we can simplify the game, but then again I think you can build this battery. The problem about h6 here is that here actually Vishy can proceed with the move h4, and okay, here g5 was now played by Magnus Carlsen, but it's a different story. Notice in the previous continuation Vishy Anand had to escape here to e2, but now in this scenario, after h takes g5, h takes g5, now Vishy can jump here to h3, and it's now different story, because now on e2 the knight was passive, but now on h3 actually the knight is active and is attacking now the weakness on g5. So that's the difference between early g5 and then this delayed g5 that Magnus Carlsen played. Now here Vishy is taking over, and suddenly Vishy has a slightly better position. So here in the continuation we have king to g7, we have rook to f5 by Vishy Anand, we have rook to h8, and now knight to g5. And this was now again a mistake by Vishy. You should not have you don't have to take out the pawn here on g5. You can improve your position just by playing queen to f3. Still maybe black should be slightly better, but as I said, you don't have to take out the pawn, because after knight to g5, what black should play here is simply knight to g5. You have to play rook to g5, but look at this, king to f8. We're simply stepping back, although here white has up a pawn, but the problem is now after queen to f1 you have to retreat with your queen, because the serious threat is now rook to e1. Look at this, and even if you retreat now with the queen on f1, the problem is now you can play rook to e6. Maybe black can pardon me, white can include this bishop on b1, but the problem is now this rook is coming into the game. Look at this, rook to e3 is going to happen, and now suddenly black is taking over. Black will build really a brutal e file battery with both of these rooks by including this rook in a beautiful way. So you see rook to h3, rook to e3, and again black is much better. But instead of this after move knight to g5, instead of this move knight to g5, what Magnus did, he played rook to h4. So he didn't take out the knight, and actually this is now a new mistake by Magnus Carlsen, and Vishy found now really the epic move, one of the most brilliant moves of the game. Maybe you can pause the video and try to see now the best continuation here for for white. It's really hard to see. It's really a dirty chess tactic that Vishy of course did not miss. Now he realized his tactical opportunity in the game and played now a really a beautiful bishop to d5, and this is now I think the winning tactic, because here in the continuation, if you take for instance rook to g4, this is not possible because you get rook to g4. Look at this, knight to g4, and now the problem is you get here this rook to f7 move and you lose the battle. You have to step back with the king to g6. We can play bishop to e4. You can maybe take out the knight, but look at this, queen to d2, and this is now game over here for black. So even if you try here knight to g4, it's not it doesn't change anything because you get again rook to f7, so the game is over. Even if you try of course knight to d5, then you get knight to e4. Look at this, you have to again lose some decisive material, so this is not good. After move bishop to d5, what Magnus tried now is knight to g5, but it's a little bit too slow now. It's not the same story, it's now a different position than the previous one that we have analyzed. After rook to g5, the king has to step back on f8, but now with bishop to f3, Vishy is playing of course a very passive move. Maybe queen to g3 is here slightly better, just forcing a trade of queens and going into a favorable endgame where of course white is here a 4 versus 2 situation. So this was now a winning move for white, but Vishy played a slightly inaccurate move. He played bishop to f3, and now after queen to f4 we have rook to e5, rook takes e5, d takes e5, queen to e5. Still it's a risky position for both sides of course. Okay, here Vishy Anand has still this 3 versus 2 situation on the queen side, so he can maybe create here a passer, but this should be probably a drawish continuation for both of them. So king to f2, and now comes the critical moment again here, rook to h3. Again, a slightly inaccurate move here by Magnus Carlsen, but this is blitz. This is a really fast time format. As I said in the beginning, Magnus had here only 7 minutes on the clock in the Armageddon game. Here what you can do, instead of this rook to rook to h3, you can play rook to h1. That's I think much better, because you're always threatening this move queen to e1. So in order to make something happen, white needs to first defend the position. It's now different. So as I said, but after move rook to h3, it gives here time white to play the move g5, and it's now tempo against the knight. The knight has to move here on h5, and now g6. And okay, the only way to make a draw here for Magnus Carlsen would be the move queen to c5, which he unfortunately missed. Again, you could try maybe just to do some perpetual checks or similar stuff, but Magnus Carlsen took, and this was now the main mistake, and from this point on the game is over, because Vishy has now this very annoying check, queen to d8. We have queen to e8 after a couple of trades of queens. We have rook to g6, and look at this. Now this pawn is saying this pawn will be lost, so it's now a completely winning endgame here for Vishy Anand. So we have knight to f4, rook takes a6, knight to d3, king to e3. Here Magnus played even this worst move, knight to e5. Here after move rook to e6 in this position, Magnus Carlsen resigned. Even if you, I don't know, played knight to b2, that was of course much better because you're taking a pawn, but still it's an unpleasant endgame, because first of all what we should do here from white's perspective, cutting off the king, not allowing this king to come into the game, we just push, and that's now winning endgame here, because of the fact that also the bishop here is covering the a8 square. So this a8 square is supported by the bishop, and we have to just push the pawn, and this should be a completely winning endgame here for white. So what to say, Vishy Anand won his match game against Magnus Carlsen. Congratulations. I think it was a deserved one, because in the first classical time form game, Vishy should have won even the game immediately, so he should not have even played this Armageddon game how he played in the first game. So as I said, it was a deserved win. Now Vishy is in the lead of this very cool tournament. Congratulations. I hope that he can go till the end, because it will be really cool thing for the chess community that Vishy gets back into the classical chess, that he wins such an important tournament like the Norway Chess Classic. So as I said, really brilliant news we have now every day in the chess community. So this is a stunning performance by Vishy Anand. So okay, I hope that you enjoyed the game. I really enjoyed it a lot. Of course there are some many inaccuracies, mistakes, but this is simply Armageddon chess. If you want to see more games from this chess event, please check out my coverage so far with some other games that we have analyzed so far. And if you like this content, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. See you soon with some more videos, and chess is the best, of course.